drill. We're going to start by having all the commissioners introduce themselves. You will then have a period of 3 or 4 minutes to make an opening statement. I assigned your vetting to Commissioner Thomas. He'll start the questioning, and then we'll go through ask the questions. And that'll take 20 minutes or so, and then I'll keep an eye on the clock, and I'll be sure to hold back 3 or 4 minutes for you at the end.
Great, thank you.
So no further ado, again, welcome Mike Sasso. Vice Chair Carl.
Good afternoon, Carrie Ann. Amanda Carl, in-house counsel at Duda & Sons in Oviedo, Florida. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Commissioner Andy Bardos.
Good afternoon, Andy Bardos at the Gray Robinson Law Firm. I'm in Indiana.
Good to see you.
Commissioner Lauren Blocker.
Good afternoon. I'm Lauren Blocker, in-house counsel at FIS, and I'm in Ponte Vedra, St. Johns County.
Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vincent Citro.
Good afternoon again, Vincent Citro with the law offices of Horowitz and Citro in downtown Orlando.
Great to see you.
Commissioner David DeArmas.
I think he's still in his hearing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. He had a hearing. He's not back yet. I'm so sorry. He had a hearing. He's still offline. Commissioner Craig Dyer.
Hi, Judge. Craig Dyer. I'm formerly with the Public Defender's Office in Daytona Beach.
Great to see you. And just to clarify, I'm not a judge right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Carrie Eisnagel.
Hi, good afternoon. Carrie Eisnagel. I'm here in Sanford. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And Commissioner Scott Thomas.
Good afternoon, Carrie Ann. Good to see you again. Scott Thomas with the Burr Foreman Law Firm up here in Ponte Vedra Beach, St. Johns County.
Great to see you.
Okay, Carrie Ann, you have the floor.
Okay, great. So I'll start by saying that I have not had a job interview in almost 15 years. And so if you had told me back then that I would be interviewing by Zoom with you all because of a pandemic, I'm just really not sure what I would have thought at the time. But here we are. And I want to start by saying thank you very much for your service. It's great seeing familiar faces and great to meet the new people on the JNC. I had the privilege of serving on this JNC, and so I understand firsthand the dedication and the time that goes into your service, and I appreciate that. About me, I'm a native Central Floridian, born and raised in Orlando, and I have great parents who instilled in me the value of hard work and the honor of being an American, including our separation of powers, which ensures that the government remains accountable to the people. And it was really when I clerked for Justice Anstead at the Florida Supreme Court that I witnessed great people doing really great service and realized what service opportunities there could be for me in the future. And it was an honor to work there on a variety of really complicated cases, such as conflicts between the district courts of appeal, death penalty cases, certified questions from the district courts, and the like. And so after my clerkship, I went to Ackerman with a love of appellate practice and a great respect and appreciation for our court system. I started as a litigator doing complex commercial litigation. So I know and respect how trial judges have to make quick, decisive decisions with a really large caseload. And I took every opportunity I could to do as many appeals as I could and to become an expert in that field, because that really is the field that I love the most. I got involved in the Florida Bar appellate section because I knew then that there were really experienced attorneys that I could learn a lot from. And I became a leader of various committees and was selected to be an officer of the section. And I'm going to be chair of the section in 2 years. I also became board certified in appellate practice, and I'm now a member of the board certification committee. So I really like seeing how things work from the inside and being part of the process. Additionally, I was selected to be the general counsel for the Florida Bankers Association. My firm has been their general counsel for about 50 to 60 years, a really long time. And my predecessor was retiring. And so I was selected by my firm and by the Florida Bankers to take over as their general counsel. And in addition to doing legal things that come up in any organization, like HR issues, bylaws, things like that, I also work on legislation. I draft bills, I lobby for bills and revise them. And so I fully understand firsthand the difference between legislation and the court system, and it is very different. So those are highlights of my professional accomplishments, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about who I am very briefly and how I work. It's my personal and professional commitment to serve my community and live a life with purpose and impact. I learn new things every day, and I love that. I think about the long term and the larger context of my actions, and that's how I operate. I'm a planner, and I really think a lot. I understand that the decisions I would make as a judge will have an impact on real people, the community, and the jurisprudence of Florida, and I would take this responsibility very seriously. And today I come before you looking to serve the people of Florida, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Carrie Ann, last time I think I saw you, we were on the sort of the same side of this process.
I think so, and it's very different being on this side, I must say.
Well, what's interesting is I did have a chance to vet you, and from talking to a lot of people about you, what's clear to me is you're a highly valued attorney at a highly respected law firm. Why in the world would you want to leave that, which no doubt great personal advancement, to go to the 5th District Court of Appeal?
I got to tell you, it's something that I have always thought about doing, and I've heard a lot of advice over the years on how best to build yourself up to apply to be a judge. And I think some good advice that I heard it was actually Justice Scalia who said it when he was asked for advice. He said, be the best attorney that you can be and learn to love the law. And becoming a judge is kind of a fluke. You can't really count on it. And so really that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to take every opportunity I can. I like working hard. I love teamwork, and I get to do a lot of that. I'm very happy at my current firm. But this has always been something I've always felt a very strong call for service. And it's always been a position that really fascinated me. And so I just think it's the next step for me and something that I would want to do for the rest of my career.
Great. One of the things I like to do is maybe try to highlight things I've learned that wouldn't have jumped out at your application without talking to people. You mentioned it in your opening, but can you tell us a little more about the relationship between Ackerman, you, and the Florida the Bankers Association?
Oh, sure. So the Florida Bankers, the organization has been around since I think it's the late 1800s, a really, really long time. And my firm first became involved with them, I think, when they had their first general counsel. And that was back in, I think, the 1950s. And my firm's just always had a very strong banking law practice. And so over the years, it was Don Centerfit, and then it was Tom Cardwell, and then it was Virginia Towns, just very, very respectable attorneys who have been the general counsel. And then Virginia Towns retired. And I was groomed and kind of selected to take over for her in that position. And it's really fascinating, all the things I've gotten to do because of that. They're really great people, and they have in-house lobbyists, and I assist them. I get to go to Tallahassee. I get to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with legislators, congressmen, things like that, and deal with all those issues, and then also attend all their board meetings and things like that. And it really is one of the highlights of my practice right now, is getting to work with them and being on the forefront of all those issues. And one other thing I'll say that I do is draft and file amicus briefs for the Florida Bankers. And I've done quite a few of those over the years. And I like to try and make an impact and help courts with their decisions as far as that goes too.
But in the 50 or so years Ackerman's done it, am I correct? You're only the 4th Ackerman attorney to do this, right?
Yeah, they've most of them have been very, very long term. Yes.
Lastly, and I'll let my fellow commissioners chime in after this. There's a lot of emphasis or discussion about judicial philosophy. We've been in deliberations where I know your views on that, but I thought it was interesting. You worked, or your affiliation at the Florida Supreme Court was with Justice Anstead and Justice Parente, who I think it would be fair to say wouldn't be the two choices our last two governors would have selected, for example. But that doesn't mean you didn't take something from that. What did you take from the time working with Justices Anstead and Parente that's useful and that to go forward?
Well, I have a really good short story I'll tell you. So when I was selected to be an intern for Justice Periente, the way that it works is they choose interns by seniority. So Justice Periente was about to become the Chief Justice, and so she got to pick second after then Chief Justice Anstead. So I got a call randomly. I was walking out of the law review office at Stetson, and it was Justice Periente's senior staff attorney. And she said, "Hello, Carrie Ann," introduced herself and said, "You know, I see on your resume that you are a member of the Federalist Society and Young Republicans." And she said, "I want to make sure, and the judge wants to make sure, that you would be comfortable working in our chambers." And I said, "Of course I would. I love, I don't think you should have beliefs that can't be tested and that you can't discuss." And it's funny because that senior staff attorney ended up being a really big cheerleader of mine, wrote so many letters of recommendation for me. And she and Justice Periente both recommended me to Justice Anstead, who had an opening for a clerk. And so that's kind of how I ended up there. And then when Justice Anstead interviewed me, I remember him saying, I asked him, what do you look for in a law clerk? That's a good question to ask. And he said, primarily someone I get along with and like going to work with. And so I got the job, and I can't say that we agreed philosophically on a lot of things, but I admire and love that man so much. He was a really great first supervisor. Just, there's a reason that the Board Certified Attorney of the Year award is named after him. Just the professionalism and the high standards and the humility. One other quick story. We had an intern while I was a clerk for him. And he asked Justice Anstead randomly, "Hey, we're doing a class on statutory interpretation at FSU Law. Would you mind, do you want to come to class with me?" And he said, "Sure." And it was like that same day or that week or something. And so he took Justice Anstead to class with him to talk about statutory interpretation. I have no idea what he told these students, but
yeah, that might have been the problem. Yes.
I love that story though, because it's so typical of him. And I emailed with him a couple weeks ago to tell him I was applying for this. And he told me I'd be a great judge. And that really just meant more to me than, anyone else telling me anything. So there we go.
Well, thank you for your time. I'll yield the field to the rest of the commission, but thank you.
Okay. Much. Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Carl.
And I'm actually going to pass it along to some of the commissioners who may want to ask more questions to learn some more about you, Carrie Ann.
Well, good to see you, Amanda, as always.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm going to break ranks. I've been doing this alphabetically, but we have a new commissioner, two new commissioners, and haven't had a chance to speak with you. And I'm looking at my watch. Lauren Blocker, I'd like to open it up to you.
Actually, Scott asked the question that I was going to ask about the Supreme Court, so I don't have any other questions.
Okay, pretty good. And I don't want to skip Commissioner Carrie Eisnagel.
Hi, Carrie Ann.
Hey, Carrie.
Hi. I had one question I've been asking many of the candidates. If you could describe a time that you supported a position to which your colleagues were opposed, and how that worked out, how your thinking worked on that.
Gosh, a position. I'm trying to think. Like my colleagues at my law firm, or?
Sure. Or when you were a clerk. I mean, if you had a differing position than one of the justices that you clerked for, or something,
Yeah, so there was a particular case, and this is the first thing that's coming to mind. I can't tell you a ton of specifics about the case while I was clerking, but there was a case where my judge was going to go along with the majority opinion, and he was still a bit open-minded about the decision, but he asked me, as he did sometimes, to kind of start from scratch and do a detailed memo on everything I thought about the case while the opinion was being written. And so I did that, and I ended up disagreeing with the way the majority was going on it. And that was the way that he was thinking about going. And so I was actually able to, I'm not going to say convince him because it's his decision totally, but I got him to sign on to a concurrence with, let's just say, justices that you wouldn't normally see him signing onto an opinion with. And I always just kind of laugh about that with myself that happened. And I guess that's pretty much what I can say about that. And just in general, you know, at a big firm like Ackerman, there's so many different types of people and different opinions and everything. And, you know, in my extracurricular activities, just everything that I've done, I really like working with people that have differing opinions than me. It's never a problem. I don't like being in an echo chamber. And I just think you get to a better result when your opinions are tested. And that's and being a team member, and that's just what I like. I hope I answered your question.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Okay, let me go back in order. Commissioner Andy Bardos.
Hi, Carrie Ann. Good to meet you.
Hello, great to meet you.
I'm going to ask you a non-standard question. So as I was reading your application, one thing that stood out to me is what you said about visiting Poland while Poland was still under communist rule.
Mm-hmm.
That resonated with me because I made similar trips to Hungary when I was younger, and my dad escaping from communism. And so I wondered why you put that into your application and why it's relevant to us and how it influenced you.
Thank you so much for that question. So this was an experience I had when I was a young child. I was probably about 4 years old the first time that I went to Poland. And I actually had been to Hungary when I was younger than that, but I don't remember that trip because I am part Hungarian as well. So I was sitting in my hotel room, I remember this, with my mom, and my dad was out somewhere. 4 years old, I'm looking out the window of our hotel room and I see soldiers dressed in brown walking in straight lines, like right outside the window in the town square. And I'm just thinking to myself, what is going on? It's just not something you see in America ever, you know, except at, you know, military parades and things like that. But, and then also visiting relatives who lived in a very small apartment, you know, multiple family members. I remember the bedroom turned into the dining room. That's just, you know, how it was. But just their attitude, so welcoming. So, oh my gosh, you're American. That's so amazing. We love America. We want to be like you and all of that. And so having that happen at such a young age, really, that's just the prism that I've learned everything through, is how special our country is, our separation of powers. I also mentioned in there that I have visited Auschwitz. That was when I was in middle school. I guess my parents judged me to be a pretty mature middle schooler. So I did go there, and obviously that always stuck with me too. And I think about it now as a lawyer that, you know, Hitler got into power somehow, and part of it was that, you know, judges went along with what he was doing, and there was not separation of powers. And look at the absolute horror that happens when, you know, when that can happen. And so it just, all of that just really made me appreciate where I am in America and Florida in particular. And it just really affected me. And thanks so much for that question.
Thank you. My second question is a little more mundane. If you were appointed to the 5th DCA, what would be the process by which you decide cases, and specifically, what's the process by which you prepare for oral argument and then come to reach a decision? Kind of walk me through step by step how you would approach a case.
So any case, I would look to just make sure that the parties have standing in the case. I would look at jurisdiction to make sure we properly have jurisdiction, because there can be a little bit of thorny issues when it comes to that. If those are all, you know, cut and dry and good, I would move on to really the text of whatever it is I'm looking at. If it's a constitutional issue, if it's a statute, if it's a contract. I'm always bound by the text, no matter what. And a lot of times one of those things is going to come up in a case. So I would look to that. Usually there's not any ambiguity. So I would apply the law. I'm not going to make the law. I'm not going to look at legislative intent. I'm going to look at the plain language and determine how an ordinary person conversant in the English language would have interpreted those words at the time that they were enacted, either the Constitution or the statute. If there is ambiguity, then I would possibly look to historical sources to learn more about how words were used at the time of the statute, Constitution, things like that. And then as far as getting ready for oral argument, I would rely on my clerks to research issues as well as researching issues myself, preparing bench memos. How it was at the Supreme Court was I was assigned to an oral argument case, and then I would do all the researching and all of that. A lot of times, one thing I did with that, which I think I would do as a judge as well, is read the particular statute or contractual provision or whatever it is before even reading the parties' briefs or anything, to get my own thoughts on what I think the interpretation is before it gets clouded by what the arguments are. So I think I would do that as well in this situation. And then just be as prepared as possible for the oral argument. Have a list of, questions, things I'm struggling with or anything ahead of time. And obviously at oral argument, ask the questions, be respectful, and go from there.
And would you read the briefs in your cases, or would you rely on memoranda prepared by your law clerks?
I would always read the briefs. I think the parties, being an attorney who writes briefs for a living, I just think you have to have that respect of the parties and the lawyers to actually read all the briefs yourself, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Vincent Citro.
I won't even pretend that we don't know each other and that we haven't had a number of discussions after you left this commission and I got on thoughts and processes, and I value your input. But so I only really have two questions. One, every Federalist Society member I've ever met almost gets violent if you suggest legislative history is something appropriate to look at. And yet, at the same token, most of them faint with euphoria when a conservative judge or justice consults the Federalist Papers. So explain to me the difference between those two and why one's appropriate and one's not, if that's indeed something you believe.
So I have struggled with this as well, Mr. Citro, and I think the way to describe it is, so when you're dealing with a constitutional provision and being an originalist and going back to interpreting that, I don't think that the Federalist Papers or James Madison or whoever should be the be-all, end-all. Like, just because James Madison said that a constitutional provision is this way, in his private notes or wherever, that doesn't mean that that's the end all be all. It shows how words were used back then. I think that that's how Justice Scalia used them in the DC versus Heller case, which I found very interesting about the Second Amendment and going back to its original meaning and all of that. So they're really used to shed light on how particular words were understood to be meant at that time. But I don't think that they're, the Constitution and the text itself is what really matters. Those just shed additional light if there's some ambiguity.
So probably through the mistake of then Governor Scott and his staff, I wound up on this commission. But I've had the privilege of sitting several times and sending up a list of 6. And at no point did I feel like every member of that 6 was a perfect fit. Everybody was going to have something they would need to work on in order to be an ideal judge when they took the position on the court. You having been in our shoes, what's that thing you're going to have to work on if you're selected to the short list and ultimately picked by the governor to sit on the 5th District Court of Appeals?
The only thing that comes right to mind, and it's not something that I think is an issue, but I do maybe have to explain it, is that I'm not a trial judge. I have come right from private practice. And the way I would describe it is that the attributes and skills that make a good trial judge can be very different from an appellate judge. There's some overlap, I definitely believe, but they really are separate. A trial judge, to me, it kind of seems like is in triage sometimes, just because there's so many cases, a lot of discretion. You're dealing with a lot of witnesses, the facts of the case. Whereas the appellate world, which is where I usually reside, you're limited by the record and the law and the arguments that the parties raise. And I think maybe some people don't realize how limited that role is versus the trial judge role, which is much bigger. So I think that I would just explain that, that I think, based on my experience being board certified in appeals, being on the appellate rules committee, a bunch of other things, that I don't want to say I'm an expert because that doesn't sound very humble, but I'm very well versed in the rules of procedure and the standards of review and all of those things that I could just jump right in and be on the appellate bench versus the trial bench. I don't think would be the best fit for me because I do like to research every single possible thing and before I make decisions. And I just don't think that that's possible on the trial bench. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Great.
Commissioner Craig Dyer.
Good afternoon. I had a little trouble getting to the mute button, but
I'm
it's
glad you
nice
made
to
it.
meet you, and I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Well, great to see you.
Thank you.
Okay. Carrie Ann, thank you so much. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to make some closing remarks.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much again for your hard work. And I just want to say briefly that I'm here today because of the love and support of my family, my husband, my child. I'm lucky to be surrounded by great people who I learn a lot from. I have to particularly say a thank you to my mom and dad who are watching my toddler and my Labrador retriever today so that there's not any interruptions during this. And I just share that with you so you know the sacrifice that others have made for me to be here today. And if you submit my name to the governor, I will take that responsibility very seriously and make it a decision that you're proud of. And thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Great to see you too.
All right, Mr. Chairman,